A tree and a blade of grass both start the same way. Seed in the ground, darkness, silence, no evidence of what they'll become. But one of them grows down before it grows up. One of them sends roots deeper than the eye can see. One of them endures seasons, weathers storms, survives drought, and one day that seed becomes something that casts shade over everything that stays at ground level. The grass didn't do anything wrong. The tree didn't betray anything. They just grew differently. And nature doesn't apologize for that. But the man I want to talk today is not the tree. Not yet. He's the seed that could become a tree, sitting in the soil, fully capable of growing, choosing to stay low, choosing to stay comfortable, choosing to stay at grass level because rising means separating and separation feels like loss. So he stays, he shrinks, he keeps the peace. He calls it loyalty, calls it humility, he calls it not forgetting where he came from. But God didn't plant a tree seed in you so that you could spend the rest of your life pretending to be grass. 1 Corinthians 13, verse 11 says, when I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. Put the ways of childhood behind me, not the people, not the love, not the gratitude. The ways, the smallness, the ceiling, the comfort that was acceptable then, but is a cage now. This is episode 53, and today we are going to talk about what it actually costs a man to stay small and why growth is not betrayal. Let's talk about comfort, not the comfort of rest, comfort of smallness. The man who stays small to keep peace has made a trade, and the trade feels reasonable because the thing he is giving up, growth, height, separation, is invisible. It hasn't happened yet. But the thing he is protecting, belonging, familiarity, avoidance of conflict, is immediate, it's real now. So the trade always feels like the right one in the moment. Why risk the comfort of now for the uncertainty of growth? Why disturb relationships that are working, even if they are working at low level? Why become someone different when who you are right now is accepted? Here is the answer. Because accepted is not the same as fulfilled. Because belonging at a level below your potential is not peace, it is slow suffocation. Because the man who shrinks himself to fit in a room eventually forgets he was ever meant to be larger. Comfort at ground level has a cost that doesn't reveal itself immediately. It reveals itself in years, in the quiet weight of unlived potential, in the creeping awareness that you are capable of more but have been choosing less for so long that less has started to feel like enough. Proverbs 29, verse 25 says, fear of man will prove to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe. A snare, not an inconvenience, not a setback, a snare, a trap that holds you exactly where you are, invisible until it's already around you. The man who stays small to manage what other people think of him is not choosing peace, he's choosing a snare. Here is a truth that no one tells you when you start growing. Growth separates. It's not a side effect, it's not a problem to be solved, it's the nature of becoming. When you start waking up earlier, the men who sleep in stop calling. When you stop drinking, men who drink stop inviting you. When you start building something, the men who are only consuming don't understand the language you're speaking anymore. When you start thinking bigger, the men thinking small feel judged by your ambition, even when you've said nothing. You didn't abandon them, you grew. And growth always creates distance from what you grew out of. The tree doesn't look down at the grass with contempt, It doesn't pull up its roots to stay at ground level out of loyalty. It grows towards the light. That is its nature. And the grass remains exactly where it is. Not because the tree left it, but because the grass chose not to reach. The separation is not the sin. Staying small, staying small to avoid it is. Abraham left his country, his people, and his father's household. God didn't ask him to stay connected. God said, Go. The promise was on the other side of leaving. Lot went with him, and eventually, even Lot had to separate from Abraham for both of them to grow into what they were called to be. Genesis 13, verse 9, Abraham said to Lot, Let's part ways. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. Not anger, not betrayal, just the honest acknowledgement that two men growing in different directions cannot stay in the same place. The separation was not the end of the relationship, it was the condition for both of them to fulfill their purpose. Now, I want to name something that most men are not prepared for. When you grow, some of the people you grew up with will not celebrate it. They will call it arrogance, they will say you've changed, and they won't mean it as a compliment. They will find subtle ways to remind you where you came from. They will question your motivations. They will be uncomfortable around the version of you that has grown because that version is a mirror, and what it reflects back to them is the choice they made to stay. This is not their failure, it's human nature. Men, the man who stayed at ground level and watches someone from the same starting point grow tall is confronted every time he looks up with the question he most wants to avoid: why not me? And rather than answer that question honestly, it's easier to decide that the tree is wrong, that it grew too fast, too high, too proud, that it forgot where it came from, that its growth is form of betrayal. You already know what it feels like. The friend who goes quiet after you stop drinking, the family member who finds small ways to remind you of every mistake you made before you started building, the room that used to feel comfortable now feels like it's strictly getting smaller every time you walk in. That is not your imagination, that is the friction of becoming. Do not absorb that verdict. It is not yours to carry. John 15, verses 18 and 19 says, If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. That is why the world hates you. Chosen out of the world, the resistance you feel from the people you grew up with is not evidence that you've gone wrong. It's often evidence that you've gone right. The man who belongs to the world is comfortable everywhere. The man growing towards something higher will feel the friction of leaving lower things behind. Here is the third part of this argument, and this one is the hardest here. You cannot rise and stay rooted in the same soil that kept you low. The soil is not just the people, the soil is the conversations, the habits, the mindset, the daily environment, the ceiling that everyone around you has agreed to accept. The stories about what is and isn't possible for someone from where you're from. A tree planted in shallow soil cannot grow tall, not because it lacks the DNA of a tall tree, but because the environment cannot support the roots that uh, height requires. You can want to grow, you can pray to grow, but if you remain in soil that cannot hold deep roots, the growth will be stunted every time. The man who stays small to keep the peace is choosing the soil over the growth. He is deciding that the environment is more important than the potential it is suppressing. And every year he stays, the roots get shallower and the height gets further away. 1 Corinthians 15 verse 33. Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. Corrupts, not influences, not affects, corrupts. The company you keep is not a neutral factor in who you become. It is an active force. And the man who insists on keeping company that is pulling him down is not being loyal. He is being eroded. This pattern runs all the way through scripture. God consistently calls out men out of one environment into another. The leaving is never the punishment. The leaving is the pathway. Abraham left. Joseph was separated from his brothers violently, painfully, not by choice. But that separation was the road to Egypt, to Pharaoh's house, to the position that would save nations. What looked like abandonment was architecture. Moses was separated from Egypt. David was separated from his father's field. Paul was separated from everything he had built his identity around before Damascus. In every case, the separation was not the cost of purpose, it was the condition of it. Jeremiah 1 verse 5 says, Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. Set apart before birth. The separation was built into the calling before the man existed. This means the discomfort you feel when you grow away from what you grew up in is not a mistake, it's a confirmation. You were designed for something that required the leaving. The tree was always going to grow above the grass that was in the seed before it was ever planted. And no amount of staying low changes what was designed to be high. I want to be specific because staying small to keep the peace doesn't always look like weakness. Sometimes it looks like virtue. It looks like a man who has an opportunity to move to a new city, to a new circle, a new level of work, but doesn't take it because it would mean leaving people who need him. He calls it loyalty. But loyalty to what? To their comfort, to the version of him that fits nearly into their world. That is not loyalty. That is self sacrifice in the wrong direction. It looks like the man who dims his ambition and conversation because the room doesn't have the capacity for it. He calls it humility. But real humility is not the separation of what God put in you. Real humility is the surrender of ego in service of purpose. Shrinking your calling to manage other people's comfort is not humility. It is fear with a better name. It looks like the man who keeps friendships with their past. Um, it looks like the man who keeps friendships well past their season because ending them feels like a statement about the other person. But seasons end. Not every relationship was built for every chapter of your life. Some people were in your life for a reason, some for a season. Holding holding on to holding on to season relationships as though they are lifetime ones doesn't honor the person. It traps both of you. Romans 12 verse 2 says this: Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Do not conform, be transformed. Conforming is what the man at grass level does when he decides the ceiling of his environment is his ceiling too. Transformation is what happens when he refuses to let the ground level define his height. Now, I want to speak to the tone of this because growth without bitterness is possible, and it is the only growth worth having. You do not need to look down on the grass to become a tree. The tree does not grow tall out of contempt for what it left behind. It grows towards the light. because that is what it was built to do. The direction is upward, not away from, but toward. The man who grows with bitterness has made his growth about the people he left. The man who grows with gratitude has made it about the God he's moving toward. These produce entirely this produce entirely different trees. You can honor where you came from without being defined by it. You can love the people who stayed at ground level without staying there with them. You can wish them well genuinely, not performatively, not from a height, and still continue rising. And here is the deeper truth. A tree, a tall tree provides shade. That very growth that separated you from the grass becomes the thing that protects it. You don't grow for yourself alone. You grow so that what you become can serve what you left behind. From a height it could never have reached while you stayed low. Matthew 5, verse 16 says, "Let your light shine before others, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." Let it shine, not for your glory, for His. And light cannot shine if you keep it buried at ground level to avoid making the darkness uncomfortable. Three things now. First, identify where you are staying small to keep the peace. Be honest. Is there a relationship, an environment, conversation, a habit a ceiling you've accepted? Not because it's right for you, but because leaving it feels like abandonment. Name it. Write it down. Comfort named is the beginning of comfort examined. Second, ask the soil question. Does your current environment have the capacity to hold the roots your growth requires? Is the daily conversation around you pulling you toward what you are becoming or back toward who you were? You do not need to make a decision today, but you need to ask a question honestly. Third, grow without contempt. If you are rising, rise clean. Take nothing bitter with you. The separation is not a statement about the people you grew up with. It is a statement about the calling you are answering. Keep those two things separate in your heart, and you will grow into something that serves rather than scorns. Trees don't hang with grass, not because the tree is better, not because the grass is wrong, but because growth is directional, and the direction of a tree is always up. You started from the same place as every man around you, same soil, same darkness, same beginning. But what you carry inside you was always meant to go higher than where the seed was planted. Staying low to keep the peace is not loyalty, it is the disobedience dressed in humility. You were set apart before you were born. The separation you feel when you grow is not a mistake, it is a confirmation. Grow towards the light. I know what I just asked you to carry. Some of you are going to close this episode and walk into a conversation that needed to happen for years. Some of you are going to sit with something uncomfortable for the first time instead of burying it. That takes courage. I see it. Keep going. This is built, not felt by the Rice Code. I'll see you all in the next episode.